Hi, Tom. We're here today to talk about Blackwater Refuge, and this is Tom Miller, a U.S. Fish and Wildlife officer from the Blackwater Refuge, which is in Dorchester County, a very big refuge, 27,000 acres, that was established in 1933. So, Tom, tell us more about the refuge.
Yeah, as you mentioned, we were established in 1933, so we're, actually one of the older refuges, actually the oldest in the Northeast United States. We were established primarily for migratory waterfowl, which, when we refer to waterfowl, we talk about our web-footed friends, ducks, geese, and swans. At that time, in the 1920s and 30s, there was a lot of unregulated, indiscriminate hunting that was going on with those birds, and their populations declined pretty rapidly. So the Migratory Bird Act of 1929 gave the government authority to establish places like Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge to set aside for protection of certain species. And so Blackwater again was established, primarily as a place of refuge for the waterfowl during their migration. So, we started out with a little over 8,000 acres, and through the years, through purchase, have grown to approximately 27,000 acres that we have today.
Now, you were saying to me that at the beginning there were a lot of ducks there, but not as many geese. And has that remained the same?
Yeah, when we first established, there were quite a few, primarily ducks were coming to the refuge. Over the years, farming practices have changed from back in the early 1900s. A lot of the crops were still harvested by hand, and as the years went by, we progressed into mechanical harvesting of crops, and that left a lot on the ground for these migratory birds to pick up. And so as time went on, a lot of our geese, their migration patterns actually changed a little bit. And in Dorchester County and all over the Eastern Shore, of course, agriculture is our primary industry here. And so with the automated corn pickers and harvesters of all crops, you're starting to see changes in migratory patterns of geese, which brought more geese into our area. And even today, there's a lot more geese in our area today, and really even farther north of us today, the geese have changed their migration patterns because there's a lot of food on the ground for them to eat. And as long as they have plenty of food on the ground to eat, they're not going to go further south. They're only going to go as far as they need to go. So, we sometimes we don't see a whole lot of geese until later on in the winter, when we get more snow cover up north. Then the geese get pushed down a little bit further. But historically, the geese would kind of bypass us and go further south. But as more food became available to them, they started what we call short stopping all the way up the East Coast, and that's what brought in more geese to the Eastern Shore. So today we have a pretty good mixture of both geese and ducks and swans on the Eastern Shore of Maryland.
So the composition of Blackwater Refuge, how much of it is marsh?
Well, we kind of have a percentage we go by. We have of the 27,000 acres, we say we have approximately 1/3 in forested land, 1/3 in marshland, and 1/3 in open water. Is roughly what we have, what the composition is at Blackwater at this point. We also have several hundred acres of farmland, which is a management tool that we use for the migratory waterfowl. We do use farming to feed them every year as a management tool. We also have a few hundred acres of what we call freshwater impoundments, which are another management tool that we use. We can manipulate the water levels in these freshwater impoundments, or ponds as they are, and it attracts more migratory waterfowl into them and allows us to plant food in there they like to eat, and therefore give them a little extra energy during their migration. So, those two things aside, approximately, again, 1/3 forest, 1/3 open water, 1/3 tidal marshland.
Let's talk about impoundments for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
You manipulate the water, so
Mm-hmm.
could you explain to us what that is?
Yeah, impoundments are just a $5 word, means man-made pond. So it is again, it's a management technique that both the federal government and private landowners use to attract waterfowl to their property. And generally the pattern that we follow is late spring, early summer. We actually take the water out of our impoundments. We draw them down to empty or almost empty. And during the growing season, we can actually grow vegetation in them that we want to be in them. And in some cases, we actually plant crops in them, like millet or sorghum or corn or something like that. In some cases, the grasses that are growing naturally, pretty good food for the waterfowl. So during the summer months, we let that grow up, and we can either use gravity or pumps to pump the water out during the springtime. So then again in the summer we grow the crops or whatever the vegetation in these impoundments, and then starting in September, October, we do rely on the rainfall to give us the water, several inches of water back in these impoundments. And usually by the time our migratory birds are flying in, they see these freshwater impoundments. They're a nice secluded place for them to get into. There's lots of vegetation for them to hide in, and they also eat that vegetation. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like a rest stop. It's a pit stop. It's a fuel station for these birds during migration. So they find places to hide where they can rest and be comfortable, and a lot of good food down there to eat. And of course, there's lots of little roots and invertebrates down in the soil as well that they feed on. So that's the whole process of the whole reason why we have the impoundment system. And usually by the time throughout the winter, these ducks are using that, and then they usually leave by February, March, April. They're heading back north again, and usually by that time all the vegetation's gone, and the impoundments are just open water again. And then we start the process over again. We drain the water out and grow new stuff in it again. So again, it's a very big management tool that we can use for them.
Well, coming in January,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be having an eagle program. And could you tell us about the eagles? I read that in this nice book, The Great Marsh by Tom Horton, that the eagles like to live close to the water. So could you tell us about your program, please?
Well, again, eagles are our national symbol and a very, one of the most recognizable birds of prey in the United States and in the world, really. And Chesapeake Bay has always been an area of where numbers of bald eagles have lived. And yeah, you're right, they do like to live near water because one of their primary sources of food are fish. Even though they are very generalist eaters, they'll eat just about anything. Reptiles, mammals, other birds, roadkill, anything like that. But eagles are kind of they do like to live near water, and so Blackwater, our refuge, has always been home to a large concentration of nesting eagles. And number one, because South Dorchester County has always been real wild. Always had a lot of good nesting habitat. And our eagles like to nest in tall trees, primarily loblolly pine trees, and there's lots of that in South Dorchester. Again, South Dorchester very sparsely populated with humans, so you got a lot of nice, good habitat for them to build their nest in, a lot of food resources just everywhere out there, so therefore it's just the perfect place for them to congregate. And
what's exciting, you were telling me, is the amount of eagles, the resurgence of eagles since the 70s.
Yes, and we're having we've done a survey every year in January. Since the 1970s, of course, the eagle populations went way down because of the pesticide DDT back in the 60s. And since it was, put on the endangered species list, we have monitored and tried to help the eagle along as much as we could over the years. And, by doing these surveys, we can find the relative abundance of these eagles. And, again, in the 70s, we did a survey and you get 10 or 20 eagles during a survey, and since that time the numbers have just grown every year.
Could you explain for 1 second? Could you explain why DDT,
Yeah.
sorry, why it hurt the eagles?
Well, it was a pesticide. It was something that was developed to kill mosquitoes, and it did it very well. Unfortunately, though, unlike hindsight's always 20/20 when you're putting something like that out there, and the bugs that it killed, of course, went down. A lot of them went down to the waterways, and of course, the fish in the waterways ate those dead bugs, and the pesticide that was accumulating inside these insects then accumulated in a more dense fashion inside fish. And of course, a big part of the eagles' diet are fish. So when the eagles ate these fish, the chemical ended up inside of them. And it didn't kill the eagles, but what happened was that when the female eagles laid eggs, their eggshells were very, very thin. It thinned the eggshells in the female eagles. And so when the eagles sat down on their eggs, they would pretty much crush their own eggs, because eagles are, weighty birds, 10 to 12 pounds. So, it was something that, because eagles are big birds, they only have 1 or 2 young at a time. And so, you had a really rapid effect on the eagles. Their numbers went way down. Other birds like ospreys were also affected. Fish eaters were also affected by this chemical. And so their numbers went way down. We eventually figured out what was going on, and the pesticide was banned. And as the pesticide has worked its way out of the environment, the eagles have then rebounded. And
so we have good news.
Yes.
And we'll be back with more about Blackwater Refuge. Thank you.
Is that 2 minutes?
It just consumed my entire life, Doc. It's ruining everything I ever worked for. Can you help me? Everything they have is too good. I just can't pick. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I don't know. I don't know what I need. Do you have some anti-Avalon pills or something? I don't know. There's Molasses Creek, there's Preservation Hall, the freaking Temptations, Doctor. It's so tempting. How can I say no to the Temptations?
Mm-hmm. How has the Avalon made you want to go to the opera? Are you an opera fan?
Have you seen it? It's HD. It's right there. I don't have to go all the way to New York City and fight that traffic. I could go right just to the Avalon and see amazing quality performances right there on the screen. It's basically the same as being in the Met. There's no difference really. The first time I ever started singing involuntarily, I was just walking right down my hallway and it came out of nowhere.
Ava's in downtown St. Michaels, Maryland serves a staple of gourmet pizzas featuring locally produced fresh ingredients. An ever-changing mix of entrees and sandwiches are fired in the brick oven on display in the main dining area. Ava's also features a diverse wine and international beer selection, as well as your favorite cocktail. And right across the street at Akai, an Eastern Shore native, executive sushi chef Tim Redmond has a fresh and frequently irreverent take on the traditional cuisine of Japan. Tim's artistic eye confidently allows experimenting with the traditional while still preserving the essential elements of time-honored Japanese cuisine. Ava's and Akai open 7 days a week in downtown St. Michael's, Maryland.
I love you like grave danger, like moonshine in disguise.
Hi, we're back again to talk about Blackwater Refuge, and our guest today is Bill Giese with the U.S. Wildlife and Fish. He's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Officer at Blackwater. Bill, could you tell us, you had said to us about the way you manage Blackwater, and it's 27,000 acres with tree management, with farm management, and your subject matter today is
fire management. Fire's been used on the refuge long before the refuge, even the Fish and Wildlife Service even bought the refuge. It was used by the locals to control the vegetation, kind of keep the vegetation that's there, to maintain it, and we still maintain that practice today. We, starting usually around January, we have a fairly extensive burning program, prescribed burning program in our marshes that we burn, which is the biggest part of our fire management program. And it's the vegetation's dead, of course, at that time of year, and we're just burning off the top vegetation. We don't burn down into the peat because that's important because of don't want to disturb the elevation of the marsh. And and we do that for a number of reasons. It's a hazard reduction situation where we can burn it under controlled circumstances, with the right type of weather, and so that we don't risk eagle's nest and people that live around the refuge, their residences, that that keeps that from being at risk. And we also burn it because it's simply good for the marsh. And burning has been very controversial at the refuge because we've annually burned over the years, and because Blackwater has experienced a lot of marsh loss. One of the things everyone looked at was, well, maybe it's because of the burning. And in more recent years here, we've done a lot of research with the U.S. Geological Survey, and we're actually finding, which we in the field had actually seen all along, was that the areas that are burnt, while they're still declining, but they're declining at a much slower rate than the areas that are not burnt.
What does that mean by declining?
Well, the areas, the loss of the vegetation in the marsh. Blackwater's lost about 5,000 acres over the years, and since it was established in the 30s, and obviously that's changing from vegetation to open water, and that's a big concern. What we're finding is that it's more of a geological process that's taking place. The basin of the refuge was believed to be a river basin, either of a tributary or part of the Susquehanna River at one time, one of the courses of it, which filled up with sediment. And now over the years, those sediments are starting very slowly to settle out. So we're not only seeing sea level rise from obviously global warming and the conditions that cause that, we're also seeing a sinking of the area as well. And the vegetation, because it's so close to sea level rise, it simply can't compete, and with the high tides of every year, and so it ultimately starts to die out. And so at least we feel with the burning, we're stimulating those plants and creating more root growth above and below the surface. So it is definitely a management tool that we use.
So if you're burning this 3,000 acres or close to that each year. The plant growth, the root system becomes stronger.
Becomes stronger partially because the black surface of the burnt area obviously warms up quicker in the spring, and so it creates a longer growing season and allows the plant to be more vigorous. There's also release of nutrients from the fire that the roots absorb, and again it does see. And again, we're not stopping marsh loss, but we're definitely seeing the trend towards slowing it. We burn about 3,000 acres on the refuge on a yearly basis, budget permitting, and and we also have a cooperative agreement with the state, so we're involved with helping the state manage some of their land using fire management, because we have a dedicated fire crew of 6 people and some specialized equipment on the refuge.
Before we talk about the equipment, because I think that'd be interesting for people to learn about, are you burning marshland that is closest to the bay itself?
We're burning, well, the refuge is somewhat away from the bay, but it's in the basin, marsh basin, that drains into the bay. And of course, there's lots of values, of course, to maintaining a healthy marsh. The filtering system and the fact that it's home and food for a lot of wildlife species, and a lot of our marine species such as crabs and the fisheries resources also depend on the marsh for detritus and nursery grounds. So these areas are extremely important. So our goal is to try to maintain them as long as we can.
Just a little break in here. The book, The Great Marsh by Tom Horton, talked about eels, and I always thought, oh, I saw something in the water that was long, but I never knew what it was.
Well, eels use the refuge as well as many other fish. A lot of the species of fish come out of the salt water and spawn up into the freshwater. Eels spend part of their life in the freshwater areas, and so that's again, the marshes are very important in having these areas of fresh and brackish water.
Could you name the rivers that come into Blackwater?
Well, the Blackwater system is part of the whole, like, Nanticoke Blackwater River Basin, which is extensive, thousands and thousands of acres. Probably about 40% or more of Maryland's wetlands are in this basin. So the primary rivers would be the Blackwater, Little Blackwater, Transquakin, Chickamaucomico, and Nanticoke. The Nanticoke River would be the major rivers of this system.
Okay, now going back to fire management for a minute, could you explain about that platoon boat that's going around?
Yeah, we use a lot of specialized equipment. One of the things we use is called a Marsh Master, which is an amphibious tracked vehicle. We use that because it does very little damage to the marsh, and so we can traverse across the marsh and put in fire breaks and control the fire, and that allows us to do that. And of course our big emphasis is that's number one is firefighter safety and public safety. So it's it does allow us to do the operation much more safer than we traditionally used, which was walking the marsh with a drip torch and putting fire on the ground that way.
And we were talking earlier that it's not just here in Dorchester County that fire management is done. It's a tool that is done across the country.
Part of it is we and fire is used in the marshes of Louisiana, but fire is used to manage a lot of the habitats across the country, and really needs to be used a lot more than it is because the catastrophic wildfires that we see in the news often today is simply because of just lack of management and the ability to manage some of these habitat types, such as the forest that traditionally naturally would burn every so many years. We've been in a practice of kind of putting fires out quickly as fast as we could. And now over time, fuel loads have established to such a great level that when we get these fires, they're very hard. They're large. They're very difficult to put out, and of course, as our populations have changed, people have moved into those areas, and you put people at risk. And that's one nice thing about Blackwater is we don't have a lot of issues with that because the lower part of the county is pretty thinly populated. So and people understand fire. It's been used on the landscape there for quite a number of years.
One last thing before we take a break. Could you just talk a little bit about peat?
Well, again, peat is part of what makes the refuge, and it's the vegetative material that the plant falls down, or it's in the root matter that dies, that helps accumulate the level of the marsh, and those peat levels also help trap sediments, and so that's what a lot of our area is made of is peat. It's a sort of a floating system, more or less. It's very very soluble, and the base is not solid at all.
So all you gardeners out there, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to come to Blackwater and get your peat moss for your gardening,
Right.
but still come to Blackwater because it's the most beautiful place. So, Bill, thank you, and we'll see you in a minute.
All right, thank you.
Hi! Who's got the time to think? I got no time to drink, 'cause I need somebody to love. Yeah, baby, I love you so, but you gotta love me more. Why don't you hold me closer, and I'll give you more. Yeah!
Hi, my name is Sherry Kern. I am the sales manager at the Comfort Inn Easton, Holiday Inn Express Easton, locally owned by JR Management Company. Holiday Inn Express Easton has fully been renovated in the past few years. We offer the indoor pool. We have the full continental breakfast in the morning, hot breakfast. We have meeting room space at the Comfort Inn. We have two actually, plus a boardroom, which is called our Mallard Room. Comfort Inn Easton does provide the accommodations for construction workers or travel teams, sports teams, motor coach, which are exterior carters, and we have a beautiful courtyard pool that we also have two meeting rooms as well, as I mentioned before. If you have a wedding in town here in Easton, we do provide wedding blocks for our out-of-town guests, whether at the Holiday Inn or Comfort Inn. If you're home watching locally in the area or around town, you can call me personally. We can book your 10 rooms or so with along the meeting room as well for your out-of-town guests. The feedback by both properties in the past few weeks since I've been here have been very good, very positive, friendly staff, clean rooms, good breakfast. Too much breakfast, I've been told. If you're in town visiting for the Plein Air Festival in July or the Waterfowl Festival here in November, which is a 3-day festivity, you can stay with us. Book early because we do sell out. Again, we look forward to you checking into our hotels, whether it's the Holiday Inn Express Easton or the Comfort Inn Easton, which are located right next to one another. Hope to see you soon.
Hi, we're back again with Bill Giese and Tom Miller from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and also some friends here. they're dead, so we don't have to worry about them moving away. Bill, would you like to talk about the rats or the muskrats?
Muskrats have been a pretty important part of the tradition of Blackwater and the marshes of South Dorchester over the years. The fur industry has played a major role in the establishment of the refuge. When the refuge was actually first established, it was under the Department of Agriculture Biological Survey, and one of the things that took place on the refuge was an experimental fur station where they looked into fur ranching and kept muskrats alive in pens and did a tremendous amount of research that over the years that on muskrats on the refuge, and even today we've maintained that trapping heritage on the refuge because it is a management tool. Muskrats, occasionally the population will overpopulate and they do damage to the marsh. So as we talked about in the earlier session, it's so important to maintain our marshes. Maintaining the numbers of muskrats on the marshes is important. So we each year we put our marshes out for public bids, and local trappers, which today is not so much economic value as it is more tradition, continue to trap the marshes and harvest muskrats for sale of pelts and meats.
But talking about economics, it was said in Tom Horton's book that the farmland was less valuable than the muskrats were how many years ago?
That's true. In the 30s, in the Depression years, fur was very high value, and so a lot of these marshes were bought and sold just simply because of the value of the fur they produced. So that's it was an important resource even up into the 60s, but. Since then, kind of with the anti-fur movement, the prices have really collapsed, and so again, it's become more of a tradition in the county than an economic benefit. Although certainly some people still do it and make some money.
And can I put an aside here that you know how to skin a muskrat pretty well?
I have trapped over the years, and I can skin a muskrat, and. I never strove to be champion or anything, but it was a hobby to do after work and during the winter months.
And the meat, how's the meat?
The meats are very good, and it's a local favorite, and so it's sold very quite a bit in the local area.
Well, we're going to move over here to our furry friend. And Tom, if you could tell us what you have sitting in your lap.
Well, he's furry. He's not our friend, though, unfortunately. We'll segue, because the muskrat industry was so big at one time, at one time we were doing anything really to try to stimulate the economy, of course, through the Depression years. In the 1940s, this animal, which is an exotic animal, is native to South America. It's called the nutria, kind of a funny name, was brought into the United States, particularly was brought right into the Blackwater area. Both on the government property and on private property as well. And the whole idea was because the fur industry was doing so well with the muskrats at that time, was to raise and harvest these animals in captivity for their fur. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. However, these animals got loose into the environment, and since that time have done a lot of have had a lot of devastating effects on the marshland out there. Here in Dorchester County, in this area, they have no natural predators. They can get quite large, a big male be 20 to 25 pounds. Most of them are in the 10 to 15 pound range. But they can devour a lot of marshland. They can breed very, very quickly. And they're ready to breed within 6 months of age, and they have 2 or 3 litters a year. So they can overpopulate an area very quickly. And the big problem with them was that, unlike the muskrat, they're eating the same things as the muskrat. However, they would pull up the roots of the plants and eat the roots of the marsh grasses. And of course, when you eat the roots of the marsh grass, the marsh just disappears. So these were, partially responsible for the loss of a lot of the wetlands at Blackwater from the 1940s through present time, and it kind of represents Fish and Wildlife Service's fight against invasive species. We have lots of different invasive species throughout the country that we are fighting against, both animal and vegetative. Vegetation-wise, we're fighting Phragmites all throughout the Northeast, kudzu down south, mile a minute weed all over the place. So, it kind of represents a big focus of Fish and Wildlife Service these days to try to get rid of the invasive animals in our landscape. And we're lucky at Blackwater to have a partnership with USDA, and they have 15 and 20 full-time people who are doing nothing but getting rid of the nutria in Maryland and on the eastern shore of the Delmarva Peninsula right now.
And you're succeeding?
Right now they're doing very, very well. They have succeeded in removing almost most of the animals from Blackwater. Blackwater is essentially nutria-free. In fact, Dorchester County, very few nutria left in Dorchester County, if any at all. They're still monitoring some problem areas, but they have really taken care of the nutria in Dorchester County, and going into other counties right now, Wycomico County and up and down the Nanticoke River. So
I'd like to point out, when we were talking about fire management, we neglected to say that no animals are hurt when the fires are taking place. So, Bill, if you could just underline that for us.
Well, we burn in most of the time. The muskrats live in their houses and are underwater, and the nutria as well. And so when we're burning, the fire sweeps very quickly over the marsh, and any bird life, of course, obviously can fly out of the area. So we very seldom ever see any kind of mortality of animal life.
And Tom, you had said to me yesterday that you think one of the prettiest times to visit Blackwater is after a snow.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, all throughout the fall and winter are really our big times to see lots of waterfowl at the refuge. You get big flocks of waterfowl and ducks and at the refuge, and of course that creates a nice big spectacle. And the landscape is particularly pretty after a snow. If it's not too dangerous to get on the roads and come down. Of course, we're always one of the last people to be plowed in the county after a snow, unfortunately. But if it's safe to come down after a snow, it's particularly nice because it seems the waterfowl are always out and in mass after a snow.
But in January, those eagles are coming.
And in January, January, February, you see lots and lots of birds of prey and eagles in particular. We have both our resident eagles who are starting to build their nest, and migratory eagles from farther north who have come into our area to spend the winter. So you get hordes of eagles in the area for the winter months. So
well, Blackwater is building a new visitor center, and they have exhibits, as you see here, that came from the center. And if you all would just give a little promo about your center so more people come.
We're in the process. It's a kind of a addition/renovation of the visitor center. Can't really tell you when it's going to be done. It's sometime next year. We'll be done with it. But we will be going forward with the Eagle Festival in March. Second Saturday in March is when we usually have our Eagle Festival. So a lot of people come out to that. So I definitely want to plug the Eagle Festival, second Saturday in March. But again, we will be doing that, and then later on in the year when our visitor center reopens, we'll have another shindig at that point as well.
Oh, good. Okay, well, thank you, Bill, and thank you, Tom, for joining us. It was a great program, and this is Green Courses. Thank you.